will talk today about the scope of early career grants, how and where to start. This was the topic that was suggested by the department to me. And if there are others other than KMC Biochemistry here, my name is Swaminathan. I'm an old alumnus, graduated from here in 1987-88. I'm retired now, but for about 40 years, my research career has been in multiple institutions in India and abroad, and focused mostly on research, but also a good chunk in teaching, but research component was more. So whatever I'm going to tell you is something that is just based on my experience. I may be at the end of the day telling lots of things that many of you already know. I may be telling things that some of you may not agree with, but these are my views and I'll just share them with you, and I thank the department and the institution for giving me this opportunity. So starting from here, I'm going to only focus on early career grants, and I'm just going to have a pretty short presentation, and I think this is a topic which probably will have to go more with audience participation, with questions that you will ask and I can answer based on my experience and if I know about it or not. So I am looking at it as this is something that a fresh new employee of the institute is something a new employee has to look at now, because there is a lot of focus on having a research component as well in the institutions. So teaching institutions, primarily their responsibility is teaching, but in recent years, in tune with what Americans think, we also know that the teaching has to be informed by the research. So the research that you do, you should learn from that, and that will make you an effective teacher. That is the logic. How much of it works, that is in the hands of each one of us that do the teaching and the research. So now, you need grants essentially to do this research that the institution mandates. So you need it for your research funds. Okay, I got my animation mixed up. So early career grants, you need it for your research because your career depends on this, because today as a teacher you are monitored for both your teaching as well as your research output. And one of the things with the early career grant that I wanted to underline was that for those of you who are really interested and passionate about this, it helps you shape your future research career. Instead of choosing to do research on any random topic just to fulfill the requirements of publishing a paper, if you plan it well, your early grant can be the stepping stone for developing your future grants. And one of the things that you must remember is not everybody is going to be successful with his or her first grant application. Most of the time, like research papers, it comes back with a lot of questions and comments, and it may be outright rejected. You just need to keep trying, and even if you have had an unsuccessful grant application, at least it serves to show your ambition that you are interested in doing research, and this is something important. You want to tell your employer that you are keen to do your research because you want to have your job. Now, what an early career grant can do for you? One, multiple things other than, of course, the research that you're supposed to be doing using this. It may allow for you to collaborate. When you collaborate, you usually come up with something better than what you might do all by yourself. It can also give you scope for short periods of working in a collaborator's lab, perhaps abroad. It also lets you attend international conferences, so where you do networking, which is all important in scientific research. And so altogether it is expected to help you in career advancement. But the biggest hurdle for research, for anybody who is starting out to do research, is what should I do this research on? This is a big problem, because until then, when you had a supervisor, when you had a mentor, there was always no thinking on that part of it, because your supervisor told you what to work on. This is by and large the system that we have been accustomed to, where Any research that we can say we did was with a supervisor. The supervisor took responsibility of the direction of the research, and you were merely a tool who did what the supervisor wanted. So that is maybe research in a way, but it's still not independent that you can call your own. Now, as a young faculty, an early career grant is where you start putting your own stamp on the research that you are doing. So, identifying the research question is going to be something of a challenge. There are lots and lots of areas in which one might do research, but you should be able to identify what is the area you want to work on. Quoting from my own experience, I can only say maybe two things about it. One is, you need to be able to leverage your experience and competence. It goes without saying. If you are going to do research, you want to be able to do in a way that you can take advantage of training that you have. But of course, you are not going to have all the experience in training when you're starting. You're going to learn along the way and then use that to do research, better and better. But to start with, instead of going into an area that is completely alien to what you have been doing just because it seems interesting, that's not a good idea. You need to leverage your expertise. That's one thing. Second thing is, important from the viewpoint of the funders, the grant giving agencies, is to choose a problem that has some kind of significance. There has to be a reason why that research that you are proposing to do, why is it important? You must first convince yourself of that and then be able to convince the funder that it is important to do that. So you need to have these two conditions fulfilled. It must have some kind of significance for the scientific field in terms of understanding something, or it must have some kind of a societal benefit that you can argue that is the reason why this research must be funded. So choosing that area, that is again an individual exercise. Each one who is applying for it will have to identify based on his or her own experiences and perceptions. Just to tell an example, when I had to start my research, when I started out on my research career, that was when I returned to India after spending some years in the US. And until then, I was working with somebody who is my mentor. So whatever I do is something under the broad umbrella of this mentor. Even though, there are many things that I can claim to say I did it originally, but the research world is not going to recognize that. It's my supervisor who gets the credit for all that. So when I came to India and I wanted to do something, then I kind of stopped and took a look at what is it that I can do leveraging my expertise. So one of the things was that by training, though I started out by being a biochemist, I trained myself as a molecular virologist. So I had training in virology. So I said I need to utilize this, and the laboratory that I finally found a job in, because of various reasons, was a laboratory that was involved in translational research that was supposed to result in a tangible end product which will have societal benefit. So my priorities were kind of already fixed in that sense, but I was now thinking in terms of how to leverage my virology experience and be able to do something that is translational, because that has to align with the institute's mandate as well. So to be translational was the mandate. So what I did next was to look around and see what area of virology was that I could focus on and make it translational. So that was the time when I returned to India. It was 1997. In 96, Delhi had a huge dengue epidemic. Huge number of dengue cases and things like that. Dengue has been happening in India on and off, but 96 was marked by a lot of newspaper coverage. And when I had come, I saw this dengue everywhere in the newspapers. And that is a viral disease. So I thought, why not do something with dengue viruses? But it has to be translational. So over a period of time reading the dengue literature, I found that in India not much of dengue work is happening, and there is no medicine for it, there is no diagnostics for it, there is no vaccines for it. So I decided that I'll make it my focus, because I know about virology, but of course knowing virology gives me a little advantage, but I discovered that learning about dengue is a totally new sub area of virology. but that came next. And then, so I ended up focusing and working on dengue, and I worked in these 3 areas, which are all translational throughout my career. So when I did that, when the first grant I wrote, I had planned that this is going to be my long-term plan. I'm not going to do something, leave it, go to another area, do 1 or 2 papers, then go to another. That way you will have a lot of papers in a lot of areas, but you would not be making any significant in-depth research in any one given area. That was my viewpoint. So what will you work on? And it is important that it is, that it should be important, socially relevant project which is having some scientific significance. The next thing is, when you have decided the area in which you work, you need to be able to frame a hypothesis or a question in your research that you are going to answer, and you need to now come up with a very credible, robust methodology by which you will address the questions. This is actually the most important part. After identifying the area, you need to have your methodology right. It's not simply like I will do protein by Fullin's method and I will do that by this method and listing it out. That's not the case. You will actually bring those methods in relevance and context with your aims and say how you are going to employ those methods to achieve, to address the questions that you're asking, and how will you, interpret those results. So that is something that needs to be there. So the methodology is something that is very critical. You will have to actually spend a lot of time in the methodology part. And I can tell you that after reading, I have been a grant reviewer during my career, and I see the methodology part is what is written in a very sloppy manner as a cut and paste job. So it's really very hard to understand how this person is planning to use this methodology to address the aims that they say that they will do in the project. So how will you address your research question? You need to talk to seniors who have experience in this area, so you're able to do a good job of it and not do a simple cut and paste job. And before you start writing out a grant application, you need to have some prior groundwork done. Those things are number 1. You need to identify your funding agency, the kind of work that you propose to do, who will be a likely funding agency. There may be one, there may be more than one. You should know about that. You should know in a particular call what is the opening date, closing date, so that you are able to write your application and submit it within that time frame. There must also be, there are some with a specific focus area, that a call for grant proposals is made saying that the proposals will be funded, those that address a specific question or a specific area or whatever it is, the scope of it, those things you will have to know, and you will need to tailor your application in accordance with those requirements. You need to also know what are the eligibility conditions. Most often for early career grants, there is going to be the requirement that you should have at a minimum a doctoral degree, a PhD degree, or an MD, or whatever in the life sciences. And then you should be able to also fulfill the age requirements. There may be 1 to 3 years of postdoctoral experience required for many cases. So you need to have the information on all the guidelines of the application. Nowadays mostly everything happens online. The first grants that I wrote, they were all in paper, in multiple copies and all kinds of things, but now everything is online. And you will also need to provide relevant information about yourself, meaning you will provide a brief bio sketch, and that will underline your experience and credentials as the person who is eligible to do the work that you are proposing to do. So you need your CV also needs to be tailor-made for that particular purpose, so reviewers can quickly see it rather than writing everything that you can put under your CV. And all of us like to write all kinds of things in the CV, but no harm in tailor-making it for the reviewer, because the reviewer is not going to have the time to go through all this. When they see a long one, they dismiss it. Then you lose that little chance you had of telling them how and why you have the eligibility to do what you're doing. And you also need to have some information about the institution, its track record. Is it having, a history of prior projects completed in the department or elsewhere? Those things are also relevant information for the funding agency to know that this institution has necessary infrastructure and it can, provide support to this person if this person is given the funds. Otherwise, there are times when grants can be rejected because the institution doesn't have any infrastructural facilities. There may be specific grants, not for early research, where you can build infrastructure, but you should make sure that there is at least some preliminary basic infrastructure to do the kind of experiments you propose to do. So collect all these documents in advance, so you have everything with you. Mostly, some of them they still might need in hard copies, but mostly scans can be uploaded. So now coming to the actual grant application. The grant application has by default certain mandatory sections. Number one is an introductory section. This introduction you will use to state the research problem that you are addressing in that particular application. And when you state that, you need to say why this is a problem that needs to be addressed. You need to give sufficient justification, and you need to, by way of related literature, you need to be able to say what is currently known about it and what is not known. That is how you try to underline what are the gaps in that domain, and that gives you an opportunity to say how the research you are proposing to do is going to address those gaps. Then you need to state your specific aims very clearly, and this is something that people look at. These specific aims should be SMART aims. What does that mean? Number one, before I go to SMART, you should define the overall objective of your project. What is the final overall objective? What do you hope to accomplish at the end of this project? And then that overall objective should be split down into individual specific aims. You don't write simply a specific aim, but you decide what is the final outcome. So if it is like, to give you a very simple example, is that when I plan, I'm sitting in Hyderabad, I want to come to Manipal, so my overall objective is to reach Manipal. But the specific aims will be to identify, whether I want to come by a train or a plane, identify the flights, buy the tickets, present myself on the day, travel all the way, get down on this. These are all specific aims. So what I mean to say is that the overall aim is the overarching one. You split it into specific aims so that when you have addressed the specific aims, you have actually accomplished the overall objective. So identify what the overall objective is, break it down into specific aims. So these specific aims, each specific aim that you will break it down into should be, well, this is redundant, it has to be very specific what that particular aim is going to accomplish. It should be measurable. You cannot say that I'll do this experiment and decide that I have done what I want to do. There has to be a measure for it. How do you know that this aim has been achieved? It has to be measurable. It should be realistic. It should be achievable. The specific aim must be relevant to the overall objective, and there must be a time frame on it. So this is all abbreviated as SMART, SMART goals. So this is how your specific aims ideally should be. I dislike this kind of making acronyms, because nowadays we make acronyms for everything, but I thought I should use it here just to at least underline this, that it has to fulfill these criteria. Then your specific aims are that much more credible and valid. Then we come to the methodology. In this, you are going to describe how you will achieve each one of those specific aims. This scientific methodology that you are going to employ, this should be robust and unbiased. It's only in papers, research papers, for want of space. Methods are simply cited by prior references and no exact details are given. And this is also the reason for a lot of irreproducible research happening all over the world. We waste time trying to do something because you don't have the exact experimental conditions. You cannot go that way in a grant. You need to have your methodology very clearly written down. And then prepare a work plan. How these methods, how are you going to do them? How do those specific aims relate to each other, and in what? Because some specific aims cannot be done until something else has been completed already. So you are following a time scale. So usually the granting agencies want some kind of a diagram. Many people prefer this Gantt chart, where you will show a time scale of how much time you will be spending on each, and by what time frame every goal, every specific aim is going to be achieved. And again, talk to relevant experts, people who have written grants, seniors in the department, those that have successfully run projects, and take their inputs so that you write this methodology as well as possible. So continuing on this, you also need to cite the bibliography for the literature that you provide, what is known and what is not known. So when you do that, make sure that you are going to cite only credible, relevant and verifiable references, because people get carried away and they write all kinds of things, and there are reviewers who will insist on going back to those references to see if what the statement it is attributed to is really the case. And so what you need to do is make sure that you read those papers that you cite, and do not cite any paper from anywhere that you find. They have to be credible sources. And today it's even more important because we are having papers from all kinds of shady sources. There are publications which are called predatory publishers. There are paper mills. So you have papers. So in this day and age when only numbers are counted, institutions don't look at where the papers are published, they just look at the numbers. But they can do it, they are doing an admin job and just totaling up numbers, but you cannot afford to do that because your credibility will be undermined, because people who are sitting reviewing your grants, they will have a general sense of what are credible sources. So you need to be able to stick to those and not put any kind of reference there. Please look into the papers that you want to cite, read them up and cite them properly, because one common thing that I have seen, especially with early career research grants, these are the kind of grants with minimum requirements, and I have seen people being disqualified even there for many stupid reasons. One of the common reasons is that even in the PhD stage, a lot of our students do not realize that they have to do this, that they have to have read the papers that they are citing. So they just do cut paste and then put that, and they continue the same thing in their early grant applications, and that does not work well for them when especially a very blatant cut and paste job is seen. So make sure you have read those papers, and definitely do a plagiarism check on what you are doing, because you are citing papers, and when you are citing papers, you cannot simply lift statements word for word from them. That will be plagiarism. You need to understand the concept and then express it in a way that makes sense to your particular project and put it in your words, without of course altering the basic truth of that scientific observation that you are citing. Then the other component is the budget. You need to know first what are the kind of expenditures that the funder will allow and which they will prohibit. So that is necessary. You don't want to make a budget for things that they will not even fund. But most funders, they ask for budget under these heads: equipment, manpower, consumables, travel and overheads. This overhead, this is the money that the institution takes for administering the grant. So if you are writing a grant, you need to provide the details of your institution. Let's say for this case KMC Manipal or MAHE, whatever is the body under which the grant is given. The grant is given to the institution, and the institution then lets you use that money, and so they are actually basically administering the grant. And so for that they take some overheads, and usually the grants, they allow about 10% money of the total project. If you are asking a grant of say 25 lakhs, then 10% of that amount, 2.5 lakhs, goes to the institute. So the institute is interested in you getting a grant, not only for promoting research, you are also giving them income. So they want that as well. So you need to look at equipment when you are planning on this. Since you know the project you are working on, make sure that you are having the right equipment. For an early start grant, I do not expect that they will give you a lot of equipment money. So you need to make sure the relevant equipments are there. If there are some minor things, perhaps you can say that is specific to yours, you can ask for it. There is manpower where you can probably get many times probably one JRF. So they will give you the salary for hiring one JRF who will do the experimental work. You need to plan for consumables, the kind of day-to-day expenditure that your research will involve. So this this is the bread and butter money. This is what is running your lab day to day. If your consumables, if you are not budgeted for it carefully, you will run out of money very fast. And then travel for conferences and then the overheads. Then there are 2 points over here that I wanted to say that I have learned from experience, because in my first grant, when I could ask for an equipment, I just put the price of the equipment. And then when I got the grant and when I bought the equipment, I needed spares. I don't have money for that. I need to do some maintenance on it. I don't have money for that. So I have to actually eat into my consumables. So this I learned through experience, that when you're buying equipments, please make a margin in that will take care of these hidden expenditures. Similarly, consumables, have a realistic estimate of your consumables and then add at least a 10% margin on it, so that you are having a little maneuvering room. And the other thing, that ever since this open access became mandatory for publications, there are open access publications demand from you payment for publishing the article. So they undergo peer review, and then before it is published, you have to pay money for them. And there is no source for this money. So one of the ways that I have addressed this problem is work that also into consumables. Put a separate head and say this is for publications, and include that one, so that when you publish a paper, you don't have to run around for money. Because many times it so happens that I have seen people whose paper gets accepted, they don't have money, and now they are begging the institute, and the institute plays the tough landlord and says, no, nothing doing. We are not giving you money for this. And then they kind of make it a favor. So you don't have to, worry about that if you have already worked it in. So that is about the budgets. And at the end of the day, a good research question that is testable and has the promise of impact on science and society and our society, that is what is going to make it a successful grant. So when you are writing the grant, the first page in the grant is going to be a one-page summary, or I'd call it as a concept note. This is where you are doing what is called in America the elevator pitch. You are giving a very brief description of what the project is about. Your idea is to sell it to the reviewer as a viable project, so that they will recommend it for funding. So this one, in this one page, you will write and you will give an overall picture of the project. You have to say what is the significance. What do you mean by significance? Why is this research being done? And how will it impact the problem that you are addressing? How will it impact, the area of scientific domain that it is addressing? You need to underline the innovative component of this. What is the originality and novelty of this particular proposal that you are writing? You need to also mention the approach that you are taking to do this project. So you need to tell something about the study design and the methodology. You need to justify the competence of the investigator, that is yourself. If it is a collaborative project, there is one more person. You need to say why it is you or your collaborator, your experience and the relevance of that experience in executing this project. And you need to also a word about the environment where the research is going to be carried out, meaning you should say why it is your institution that is ideally suited for you to be doing this work. So previous projects that are completed, relevant information like that has to come here. So these are the few elements that your overall summary will include. And some general tips now. Number one, seek the help of peers and senior colleagues who are experienced in this. This may happen, may not happen, but no harm in trying. So one thing is, when you have written your draft proposal, I'm calling it a draft, it's not final. You're giving it to your friends, your peers who you think are knowledgeable, seniors who you think are your well-wishers. Get them to read it and get their feedback and see if it makes sense to you to revise it in accordance with the feedback that you get. It's not necessary that you will revise it in accordance with everything that you hear your feedback people say, but think about it critically and make the revisions that you think are necessary. So I just added this. This exercise is kind of a little difficult one because I have encountered problems, not in my own case, but I have known younger PIs who are kind of scared that giving this will result in their ideas being stolen by the person who is reading it. So this is something that is, I'm not saying it will not happen, so you need to be aware of that, so don't give it to somebody who you don't trust. Now coming to the actual writing, you need to write the specific aims first. You need your overall objective and write the specific aims. While the grant application will have the summary and everything in a particular sequence, when you start writing, you have an idea, you develop an overall objective, break it down to those specific aims and write in detail about those first. Only then you are going to be able to flesh out the rest of the proposal around those specific aims. And the methods should be matched with the specific aims. I already referred to this, so methodology is going to be an important part of your proposal and it should specifically be linked to the specific objectives or the specific. In fact, in experience, I know half the time goes in just revision and rewriting. Because you write, you rewrite, you get feedback, you think about it, so you go back and write it. So half the time maybe in writing the proposal from beginning to end, but the remaining half just goes in fine-tuning it and polishing it. You should keep the writing simple, don't use fancy language. Science doesn't care about fancy language. You just have to be simple and understandable because the reviewers are coming from different backgrounds and you don't want to impress them with language, but you just want to impress them with the scientific content. The funding decision for especially an early career grant will rely on your training. You don't have a track record yet, you are starting out. So there is no great requirement for preliminary data. So what your training is, and it will depend upon also your mentor. If this mentor is recognized, then that helps you in terms of your application being looked favorably, saying, well, if it is so-and-so student, perhaps this person might be able to do what he or she is claiming. And the relevance of the topic, your host institute's reputation. So these are the things that will determine the funding, especially in an early career grant where the preliminary data is not so critical. But if you still have some kind of experience that is relevant to the work you are proposing from your postdoctoral experience, you will have to find a way to include that. That might go in your, in the one-page summary or elsewhere where you're explaining why you can do what you're proposing to do. So other general tips. Okay, so preliminary data is not a stringent requirement. Relevant postdoc experience can be presented as evidence of experience. And competition is not as high for the early grants as it is for the regular mid and late career grants. So that is another factor in favor of early career grants. And one more thing is, don't make your grant proposal very text intensive. Try to use figures and tables wherever it is possible, because at the end of the day, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So what you will explain with lots of words can be summarized nicely if you can, make a chart or a diagram and show something in tables. So go for a pictorial representations. Use them to your advantage to cut down on the verbosity of the grant. And so having these pictures, it makes it easier also for the reviewer to get the general drift of what you're saying. And then this is some unsolicited advice, again based on experience. Prepare a short slide presentation of your grant, some half a dozen slides maybe, which is easy to understand, 6 to 8 slides maximum, and you should be able to talk about it maximum 8 to 10 minutes. The lesser the better. So you have half a dozen slides, speak a minute or a minute and a little more about each one, but that basically is telling what the proposal is, what is the question, how you will do it, why you can do it, etc. etc. The things that I said in that summary page. Use that, and if you have some preliminary data to do, you can probably put in a slide. This is because you don't want to, when you want it to rain, you have to go out with an umbrella. If you don't take the umbrella, it means that you don't believe that it's going to rain. So when you apply for a grant, it is the inherent assumption that you're going to get it. So be ready for it, right? So make this presentation. This is because if you get shortlisted, they call you for a presentation. You have to tell the committee what your grant is about. They are supposed to have read it and then shortlisted you. So don't have to give them big introductions. I have seen this happen many times when the 10 minutes are taken by the applicant just to give the background literature. And so then they get hurried by the committee members saying, we know all this, just get to the crux of it, tell us what you're going to do. And then they get flustered because they have not done this before. They are just coming and standing in front of a panel of old men who are all looking upset. So you need to have this done already. And so that is one thing. And the second thing is what I said earlier, you plan your early career grant wisely so that that grant, if allotted, if granted, and lets you do some work, that will be extendable, will be the first step in a a long-term plan. So use this opportunity to dream big, to shape your research career. So you need to plan it so you can build upon it in the future. And again, at least, this has worked for me when I was abroad. I can't say it worked for me in India. Talking to, other people about your work. So that is basically it as far as it continues. So this is part one. If you have questions, I just said something like, I want to show you a list of the granting agencies and show you some web pages which I didn't make slides of. I'll just try to show it straight away. Any questions at this point? Okay, I actually must confess that I don't know currently how it is working. Things have changed quite a bit, but in my time, which I'm talking like, I'm easily talking 3 decades ago, 25-30 lakhs was a starting kind of money that we would ask for without feeling that we are being too over ambitious. But now I think things have changed because when I talk to colleagues, I find them getting grants in terms of few crores, not the early career ones. Even the so-called mid-career and late career grants have been usually in the range of 60 lakhs, 80 lakhs. Those have been, the mid-career grants that I have been familiar with, but now I'm seeing grants in crores. I really don't know how the transition happened, but you need to probably get a more realistic estimate of this from somebody else who is more grounded in the current times. Oh, the screen is not. Can somebody help me with that? My computer is not showing up. Yeah, please ask.
When we are applying for the early research career grants, which area where we need to emphasize on the budgeting? Like as you mentioned about that they will see the more importance on the manpower and contingencies and the less weightage on the instrumentations. Right? And why I'm asking, I had a SERP grant which was finished, but I applied for a small amount. Now, when we look for, I'm from allied science, optometry background. When we look into the instrument which is related to the optometry, high-end equipments are really nil when we wanted to do the translational research. Right? In such cases, when we are applying for grants, we need to mostly rely on the instrumentation part and contingencies compared to the manual. In that case, do we have to focus on the instrument more or it has to be equalized?
I guess there can't be a one size fits all answer for that. If you are focused more on the equipments, perhaps, but my experience has been that unless the granting agency specifically focused on giving you equipment money, they do not really look very positively towards lot of equipment, a good percentage of your grant money going into equipment. They are more okay with the, they know they have to fund you at least the consumable money. And for early career researchers, I think the explicit assumption is that your institute will have some basic facilities for you to do, and it's only over a period of time where you, through your grants, will be developing the infrastructure in terms of equipments and other facilities for your project, but that happens through successive grants. Otherwise, there are this FIST grant is something for infrastructure. You need to be able to talk to your department in institute into convincing them to apply for that. Then you can get, I think that gives 100 lakhs. Right, so you need to specifically look for those kinds of things, but otherwise an early career grant focused on equipment, I am doubtful about it.
Does it have any reliance on the CV of the PA or it has
No, you are the one who is doing the work. So you are the PI.
No, I understand. What I'm asking now, if the PA has done a good amount of work in that particular area,
Yeah.
and they have strengthened the technical part, or the strengthened the area which they are working, and they are lacking, example, one electroretinography example. Rest all the past they have done, and they are having expertise in that particular area. In that case, will the funding agency will be able to opt for the yes, this CV looks good?
It is kind of a little bit of, it's a subjective decision that the committee will take a call on, cannot predict how they end up working. But if you already have had any kind of other grant, then you become disqualified for the early career grants. I think that is one of the conditions where, because this is to help you get started. So if you have received some other funding, then I think you are probably prohibited from seeking early career grant. So you need to look at the small print on all those things. No, this institutes and departments do. You have to resist it if it doesn't make sense, because that will kill your proposal. I remember an incident where a newcomer, he is getting his first grant, and he had made a presentation, and so one of the reviewers was looking through the proposal, said, but you are asking for a PCR machine and you are not doing any PCR. So this fellow, as such an innocent guy, he simply kind of, he was looking embarrassed. He said, no sir, the department, they told me it's good to have a PCR machine, they told me to include it. So we found that that proposal was okay, he didn't need a PCR machine, so we made a note that no PCR machine, but we will fund this project. So yeah. It should be, yes, it's not that percentage, it should be justified, but it should be justified, but I think maybe 10% to 15% maximum, it cannot go too much. And also, funders will always say, your institute should be able to provide this, why do you need it? In fact, I found that many people asking for laptops and PCs in their grants, the granting agencies don't give that. They say that your institute should provide you that. You cannot ask the agency to provide you this. So this happens. So there is a workaround for this. So what people do is when they are asking for equipments, they say that we need a computer to run the equipment. And then that computer is not connected to the equipment, it's in the PI's office. Yes?
Sir, not a doubt and more of an opinion. Sir, from whatever you have told and from your experience, do you think that the grant agencies are actually disproportionately favoring big universities and people who are lucky enough to work in big universities?
Pardon me, I didn't hear the last, but they're favoring who?
The big universities or people who are working, because if let's say they are expecting your university to fund or to have the infra,
Yeah.
many people in let's say universities which are not that funded could be having very good ideas but not the equipment or infrastructure to actually follow it up. If that is the case, how do we address that?
Okay, I don't know about big versus small, but the general impression will be that if it is a bigger institute, then there should be a lot of this common infrastructural facilities. So why should we be giving that to them? At the end of the day, it boils down to actually the 10 or 12 grant reviewers who are sitting there. If they feel strongly that this institution needs to be encouraged, or this PI needs to be encouraged and he doesn't have this, let's provide him this, it will happen. The only discrimination I have seen is government agencies do not look very favorably on private institutions. I know from personal experience, as long as I was working in New Delhi in a United Nations lab, no grant of mine was rejected and no reduction in budget was ever made. But when I moved to a private university for a period of time, my first grant application was cut down 40%. So I rejected the grant and told DBT that I won't run this because this money is not enough. So they bargained with me and then we reached some kind of compromise, because I was now applying with the host institute as a private university, because I worked in a private university for a short period of time. So I know that they clearly differentiate against private university because of the feeling that private universities, they misappropriate your grant money. So that is the fear. And so if private universities are able to kind of somehow clear that impression that they are giving the freedom to the PIs and not taking away the money, probably then the situation might correct itself. But this is the feeling that I got from when I asked the guy who is administering my grant is somebody I know from so many days in my years in Delhi. I said, what is the problem? I am the same guy. Why do you think suddenly that I won't be able to, that I am asking for more money? He said, no, private institutions, we don't know how they blah, 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 all these kinds of things. So they basically distrust them. So shall I go on with the next one? Okay. So I need to scroll. So the funding sources, whatever I could think of offhand, I've just listed here. There may be more that many of you are aware of. DBT is the one who has funded most of my research throughout my career, and then a small amount of it from defense, and again DBT welcome. These are the ones that I have been funded by, my work has been funded by. But you have CSIR, DST, ICMR, DAE, DRDO, EMBO and many others. So you need to be able to do some homework in terms of identifying these funding agencies. And what I found was there are a couple of these websites. One of them is the Indian Science, Technology and Innovation Portal, which are given here. This one lists, granting agencies across this whole spectrum. You find all kinds of them listed in over here. I don't know how current this information is, but it's, I think, worth the time to search through this. And there is another one called as the National Portal of India. This is also having R&D funding info related to Indian agencies. So these two I found when I was looking for this, because when I went to the individual websites, these websites, I don't know if they are under some kind of redesigning or whatever. They don't take you where they promise to take you, and there's a lot of interference in the screen loading and all that. So I could not really look into them. And again, those websites have huge number of abbreviations, more than the kind of acronyms that I have seen in immunology. Everything is, starting from, women in science and engineering is wise. And from that way, everything is made into, an abbreviation, and there is supra and there is, I don't know, all kinds of things. So you need to be able to go through them patiently and identify what is of relevance to you. How much of that is current? Again, that is something you need to probably write to the granting agency and find out. Contact information is given. You need to find out if they are monitored by live people at the other end. Okay, so let me scroll down. So there is another website which I found where CSIR has, announcements, notices and calls, all kinds of things. So you can find some information there. So what I have done is, from what I scanned through, I have just listed some of these grants. This is the DBT Research Associate Grant or Associateship for young scientists. I think this should qualify for early career as well. You can probably write it. Then these are fellowships for usually postdocs abroad who are coming back to India. There is this Ramalinga Swami Re-Entry Fellowship, Ramanujan Fellowship, and there are research grants and fellowships to encourage health research. There are different categories of this. And then you have the DBT Welcome Trust Alliance. This has early career grants, mid-career and late career grants. So you can look at the early career grants and see, the information related to that. I think with Germany, there is some MOU India has, so there is some kind of a EMBO Young Investigator Program which ran in the past. You need to find out if these things are currently running or if they will run. And then there is, in my own institute where I worked earlier, ICGB, there is early career grants that is given for people who are working either in India or abroad, but there is an early career grant there. You need to look up those things. Then there is this PM Early Career Research Grant, PMECRG, and there is another one called a Startup Research Grant for young scientists. But some of these things in the recent redesigning have been swallowed into other new names, so you need to again find out clearly about them. I'm just putting up this here so you at least have some information as a start point to go and look for it. And then there are these grants are called big grants, BIG. This is called Biotechnology Ignition Grant. That is something like what you said, translational. It allows you, if you have some kind of a novel idea, they can fund you to do proof of concept. And that grant is given for 18 months. And it's capped at 50 lakhs, at least from what I knew long back. I don't know what is the cap now. This is something you can get, and I think even early career people can, if they have a good idea and convince the agency, they can get 50 lakhs. And then there is a DEA SRC. And then, there are again grants for emerging frontiers in biotechnology. There are ICMR extramural grants. ICMR extramural grants doesn't specify anything as early career. They seem to be rolling grants throughout the year. So you can submit any time and then they will be taken up in the next cycle. Then there is something called a SERB-SURE, State University Research Excellence Grants. I am not very clearly sure if this will give it only to the PIs or to the institutions. Then there is this called SUPRA, Scientific and Useful Profound Research Advancement. This kind of suggests that everything else you do is probably not profound. But this is being made just to get this abbreviation filled out. Then you have grants that are targeting women. There is one BioCare. Then there is a Power Research Grant. There is a Wiser Grant. This is again for women. And another one, Women in Scientist Scheme. I wrote B here because there is an A that's for the government institutions. Private institutions can claim half the money, 30 lakhs. And private institutions come under this WSB category. And then there is something called as Inclusivity Research Grants for marginalized society. Okay, so that is this part. Essentially, what I have next, which I don't know if you're really interested in seeing, is I visited many of these websites and I have just taken screenshots of those. I can display one or two, there are several of them. I can share them with you if you are interested, but I'll just show you one or two. I have just tried to highlight something. Every page doesn't give all the relevant information. You need to do a little bit of digging around to get information that is relevant to what you want to do. See, for example, this is the DBT RA shape. Okay, so this is, I just highlighted some parts where, oh, it's not. So there is some eligibility criteria. You need to have a PhD in science, engineering or MD, MS degree. You need to be 40 years maximum if you are male and 45 years in the case of women. And you can apply even if you have a job, but once the grant is given, you have to quit your job. This is for 2 years. It's a temporary grant for 2 years, extendable up to 4 years. So this is an early career grant, but it is supposedly, you need to have a host institution that will give you the infrastructure and then carry it out with probably absorption into the institute later on. But I don't know if it makes sense for somebody to quit a job, do this grant. It may be for people who are, without, they're looking for their first opening perhaps. Okay, then I'll show you one more. So this is the Prime Minister Early Career Research Grant, PMECRG. And there's a lot of stuff about what the grant is about. This gives you 60 lakhs plus overheads for a period of 3 years. And maximum they give 700 grants in a year. So you have a good chance, hopefully, if you try this. And age limit is 42 years. They don't specify gender, I think. And you are eligible to apply this within 2 years of joining your institution. So these are some of the relevant things over here. So what I can do is I can share this with the department, with the HOD or somebody else, and then others can access this. But there are 20 odd pages, each one giving information along these lines. So that is all I have to say. Any questions? I think I can take now. Any more questions? Yes? Ethics approval, if it involves, you have, if it is having animals, then you have animal ethics. If you are doing human experimentation, then you need, even if you are using, if you are drawing blood from human volunteers, you need to have ethical clearance. So the institute should have those ethical bodies that will. They don't usually ask for it at that time, but if there is a requirement, then you should be able to submit that. Usually in my time, how it has happened is, I submit the grant without all this, and when they, then they say that we are going, they will give even the sanction letter, they won't release the money until I submit those things. That was the way it used to happen before.
Now we have options.
Okay.
Then does it require any ethical clearance or not? We just have to opt for yes or no.
Right, but yes or no should be.
Yeah, that should be there.
Yes.
Or they will ask.
You can't say no when you need clearance. So those things, I think they are something you need to find out for the current times, because I am outdated by easily 7-8 years now.
What is the major mistake you found in applications for rejecting when you have to reject someone's grant? Not about the budget, not about the institution, about the proposal. What are the major mistakes?
No, major thing is, like I said, you should not have received prior funding. This should be your first grant. Because in DBT, there was a program, it was called some young investigator grant, I forget now, in which I was a member there. And one person, he had received some 2 lakhs. And going strictly by the criteria of first grant, it had to be rejected. So I think me and one more person, we argued saying, no, this is 2 lakhs, this is nothing. So we should penalize him for that. But otherwise it is okay, so let's give him, he has not asked too much money. So we said, let's give him that, let's not disqualify him. That was within the discretion of the committee. And we just told the DBT official, see, every committee has one DBT officer who is doing the committee's recommendation. So we told the person that we are doing it even though this petition is there. Please, give him this. So we put it in writing and signed and gave it. So we have done that once, I know that. But age restriction is a problem, right? They give you an age range, or they tell you applicants should have been born before or born after, they give you a cutoff. And if that cutoff is off even by 1 day, you are disqualified. Because when we go to review these grants, I'm not, actually I have to correct my statement. I said there is not much competition, but we went into a room where grant applications are raised high, the whole room. It's like the size of HOD's office, all along the wall, hundreds of them, this high they are piled. And 10 of us are there. And when we went there, we said, how are we supposed to review this much? Then this DBT person officer, he tells us, oh no, just look at this, many of them don't meet this criteria, so just reject them outright. So when I take a pile, I end up rejecting, 8 out of 10 just for this stupid reasons. That the birth date is not okay. And I also rejected all applications where there are applications where the, one institute has sent dozens of applications. So it's like, KMC told you to apply and you to apply, everybody apply. And everybody has the HOD as the OPI. So we said this is a scam, so we didn't give any of those. So that was easy to reject it. Because this is supposed to be early career grant. So if that grant is given to the student, to that applicant, we felt that the HOD is going to take it away. So why do you give it to them? So we said, no, it has to be independent grant. So we sent all of us saying, please resubmit. Only one you see it all. In the next cycle. So that's how it happened. So these are stupid reasons, but we get rejected. Otherwise, what we do is, with hundreds of grants, we read a summary. We don't have time to read the whole thing. Because we have all been called from, we are all working elsewhere. And so for these meetings, mostly, people who are in Delhi only will attend. The others, it's too much trouble to, travel from somewhere. So we will go there. So we read the first page and see if it makes sense. If it makes sense, then we read further. If that first summary is not making sense, we reject it. Because that is the way we can do it when they are. So we took, after we finished 2 days, we were told that we have, covered some 300 or 350 proposals. I don't know what happened next. They said, no, we will do it in the next round. I don't think I went to the next round, nobody called me. So I think as long as you are able to make a very persuasive case for yourself, it should be, it will be seen, this early career grant should not be that difficult, but you cannot probably ask for too much money, except for that big grant which I said used to be 50 lakhs. You need to find out about that. And one of the other things about the big grant is that it gives you total autonomy. You can spend the money the way you need it. You don't have to go with specific heads. So for example, I had a grant where I had manpower so I needed 2 people to work on it, one JRF, one SRF. I had an SRF, but JRF I could not find anybody, so that money was never utilized. And then at one point, consumables ran out. So I asked the agency, I have not hired one person for manpower because I didn't get one. Can that be it's called reappropriation, or can I reutilize it for consumables? They said, no, manpower you have not there. I can't use that money. So that money just goes back to the agency because I could not find manpower for it. So they are very fixated with the heads, they don't change it. Whereas in the big grant, they will allow you to do the extra. As long as you provide the bills and justification for every expenditure you do, they in fact put the money in your bank account and you can write checks and pay. You don't even have to involve the institute. But I found out later on that somebody I knew, because of this autonomy, he misused it and misappropriated some money and got into trouble, and DBT blacklisted him and he could never get a grant anymore. So I don't know if they have revised the policy now. Yes?
So quite often when we send for grants and if it is rejected, it just says rejected. They don't give a reason as to why it is rejected. So is there any way to, is it standard practice that the granting body has to give a reason, or you can have the luxury of just stamping no and sending it out?
Ideally, the granting body should give a reason why it is rejected. That's in the hands of the reviewers who are doing it. So that leaves things to be, it's not as, desirable as it should be. But ideally, when a grant is being rejected, it is good to give reasons so that the applicant gets a chance to understand why and perhaps make it better in a subsequent round. That is something, if it's not given, I personally think it's not right. But there is no hard and fast rule in place that a comment, some kind of a note should be given on why the rejection happened. That is not the way. Yes?
So do you need to be associated with the institute to ask for a grant?
Do you need to be associated with?
The institute, like you have to be employed in the institute to apply for a grant. Like if I'm like independent right now, I now have set up a
Yeah. So the only one that is in the DBT audit, if you fulfill other conditions, but you still need to have a host institute who will let you work in their premises. You may not be an employee, but they should be willing to give you lab space. So that becomes difficult. So the condition is that because it's a early career, the expectation is that you are having a job and these grants are meant to kickstart your research
If
career.
I already have now set up for example.
Private
Then you become basically a private entity and you have certain requirements to fill on that, because I know that companies need what is called as DSIR certification. When we work with a company, the company has to go through some paperwork before they are eligible to get the grant money. So there is some kind of a process where the DBT or the funding agency makes sure that these people will carry out the research with the money that is meant for and not misuse it or something like that. So I know that we have worked with some companies and I know this kind of a documentation, but I don't know what it is because it is their headache, they do it. But one of the things is now what I see is, right now I am aware of some grants where it's in the engineering domain, where they are asking for some kind of translation work. So they are asking academic institutes to join with companies and then asking company to put in some input into this, some funds into this to get the work going. So I heard that somebody commented that one particular company X has partnered with multiple academic partners and applied for the same grant, proposing to do different things. So I don't know how the agency is going to address that kind of issues. Clearly, this person is giving the systems like the H1B visa, where you have agents in US who can file your H1B visa in multiple times so that you increase the chance of your getting the lottery. Now, of course, maybe even that is gone. But these people are giving the system and I don't know how the agency will address that. But they have specific requirements to fulfill and they need to show what they are providing into the grant in terms of. But mostly, from my experience, I know that companies show pre-existing infrastructure and people as resources they are putting into the project and then put a final rupee amount and say they are contributing so much money to the project. That is still recording.
Any other question? On the behalf of Department of Biochemistry, I thank Dr. Swaminathan for sharing his knowledge and experience and clarifying all our doubts.